Hello and welcome back to the Book Love Podcast. I'm your host, Matt from Ohio, and today I'm joined by award-winning Canadian poet and author David Lee for a lovely conversation about fantasy, self-discovery, and what it means to be seen for who you truly are. Um, the aha moment when I fell in love with reading was way back in the summer of 2000 when I picked up Eye of the World by Robert Jordan for the first time. And I just became utterly obsessed with the Wheel of Time. And then that was just like a gateway drug to all of fantasy. And I'm here to tell you all that fantasy is a great genre because it's everything, right? It's
Mm.
nonsensical, it's serious, it's an escape, it's a deep dive, it's allegory, it's a love story, there are mysteries. And David's novel, I found, is all of those things with the single cover, which I found to be really, really
Oh,
cool. Let me tell you about it.
thank you.
Released in May of this year, 2026, Not All Dragons is the story of a male named Reese who wakes up severely injured and has absolutely no memories. And almost immediately he meets Delia, who's a mermaid with off the chart acute sensory capabilities, who also can't make heads or tails of what Reese is, let alone who Reese is. So together they embark on a journey to discover what exactly Reese is. And without any spoilers, that question gets answered about a third of the way through the novel. But it doesn't answer who Reese is or why he is the way he is, or if what Reese feels on the inside can ever match how he looks on the outside. And today I get the opportunity to dive into all of those questions of identity, belonging, and self discovery in the novel itself with the author. And all that being said, David, welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you, Matt, for having me.
So this is your debut fantasy novel, yes?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
And
That's correct.
before that, you've released you've published 3 or more works of poetry.
So, yeah, I've had 2 books of poetry, Mythical Man in 2020, and in 2022, Dream of Me as Water came out. And then that same year, I co-edited an anthology with my good friend Daniel Zomparelli. It's called Queer Little Nightmares. It's an anthology of monstrous fiction and poetry where we gathered queer writers who submitted poems and short stories that celebrated monsters in cinema, in folklore, in mythology, and kind of how queerness is found in them and reclaiming the identity of a monster and what it means to queer people. Yeah. And then, yeah, Not All Dragons is my first is my first novel, which has kind of been with me ever since Mythical Man. The idea, actually, the character of Reese came to me in a poem in Mythical Man. It was a very short poem. I think it was like less than 8 lines. It was just an image of a boy who was hiding in the forest, and he was severely sad. And since that book, Mythical Man, came out, I could not stop thinking about him and what he was and who he was. And I kept pestering myself with those questions until 4 or 5 years later, I figured out what he was and just kind of tried to tell a story of that and of who he is. Yeah.
Yeah. I was telling a buddy of mine sort of about this and a little bit about you and he's like, "Really? Poetry to fantasy? That's." And I was like, "Dude, all right, listen. Like if you've never read fantasy, poetry and songs are like a huge part of the fantasy genre. Like that's
100%.
how
Yeah.
they build the feel of a culture through bars and taverns, and they provide most of the vehicle for prophecy, which is a huge thing in fantasy, and like historical information for the world is often through scraps of poetry or verse. So
Yes.
I was surprised
Yes.
that somebody else was surprised, because I was not surprised at all that Not All Dragons has some awesome poetry in it. Um, I was surprised though that like the structure of the poems in Not All Dragons is maybe maybe not for poetry people, but for the every person, they're like a little bit more
Right.
refined and finessed, right?
Well, thank you.
And it kind of took me back to my university days when I was studying Latin, and there's an entire like few quarters and semesters where you're forced to like read Latin poets as a part of learning the language. But I finished the book and I read your bio and I was like, oh, okay, it all makes sense. Um, so what was the original impetus for you to pursue poetry?
It was actually kind of um, not really my intention when I first started
Huh.
setting out to write. I fell into it kind of. So I had always wanted to be, a writer, whatever that meant to young David. And I did all the courses, and studied and practiced, and it was just one of those things where it was a logistical thing where I was nearing the end of my studies in undergrad, and I needed to finish, and I didn't want to do another year. And the only creative writing class offered that term was a poetry class, so I took it. But up until that point, I never had a penchant for poetry. I never liked it. I didn't like reading it. I thought it was difficult to get into, to understand, to relate to. That was the biggest thing. But after taking that course and subsequent courses after that, I found kind of my own footing in the genre where I was writing poems that I considered poetry, which were not things that I was studying, and reading and reflecting on. Poetry that was a bit more kind of relatable to contemporary readers, I think. I always strive to write poems that, as you've mentioned before in Not All Dragons, that are very accessible to the everyday reader. Because I feel so often that poetry is put on this pedestal, that is this genre to be just so in awe of, and this towering kind of thing over you that's very ambiguous at times. And I don't really like that. So I tried to bring poetry kind of down a little to the everyday reader, kind of to make it a bit more accessible for sure. But threads of my poems in Mythical Man and Dream of Me's Water, they've always kind of fit to me, though they are poems and in structure and in technique and composition. But like to me, the poems are always kind of snapshots of stories, of bits and pieces of the same story or different ones, just kind of fragments. Yeah.
I really enjoy how you structure your poems with the iams and the feet and the rhyming schema. I think when a lot of people think of poetry, I think a lot of the everyday people will thinks of something that is formatted a little bit more like song lyrics. You know,
Correct.
A,
Yeah.
A,
Yeah.
B, B, and it's like a complete thought each line. So I actually I really like how you kind of have a line and maybe the first line doesn't even have a subject or a verb in it, but then you go to the second line and you'll start getting some more stuff, and we still have some rhyming schema, and it's really interesting.
Yeah. It's funny. The poems that I'm thinking about, in Not All Dragons, it's like in the third part of the book. Um, those ones actually rhyme, and it's strange. None of I don't usually write poems that rhyme. I don't like to. Um, for me, it's very hard to do rhyming well because I don't even know if the rhyming poems in Not All Dragons are good enough for what I consider good enough. But at times, I think it's so hard to write a good rhyming poem, or else it just comes off sounding like a nursery rhyme.
Hokey. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It takes a very I think it's a practice that you really have to work at to write a successful rhyming poem. I think why I leaned into rhyming for the poems that Reese comes across in the book is it lent itself well to kind of the storytelling aspect of it, which going back to the nursery rhyme kind of aspect of rhyming, I leaned into that a little bit because it was easy to kind of access that to tell the story and have it kind of like stick out to him, in the words that he was reading. But yeah, there are some sequences in Not All Dragons, the beginning of chapters that are formatted a bit strangely. the waving birds
Mm-hmm.
that kind of convey Reese's dreams. I think poetry is a very good vehicle to convey such abstract thoughts like that, broken abstract thoughts, because inherently, for me at least, consider poetry has a lot of like fill in the blanks where you have to kind of read between the lines, if you will.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it was really just a matter of how could I adapt what I am comfortable and know poetry to be as, and how to kind of translate that into a novel, in prose.
I think it
Yeah.
really works because it feels the way in which you set up the meter and the feet in each of the line and everything. It feels very academic, but then the rhyming gives it sort of that accessibility and that
Mm.
fantastical feel. It was anyways. Yeah. So I now that you've published both, now that you've written both, professionally, which which one are you starting to gravitate towards more now? I'm sure they both speak to you. Does one speak to you more than the other currently?
No, they don't. They don't. Neither speak to me more than the other. I find value in both genres that I work in. I do miss writing. When I was writing the novel, I did miss writing poetry a bit more, and maybe that's why I included the poems in the novel to kind of sneak that in. But I find it depends on the subject matter, I think, and the themes that I want to work with, and which genre will give me the space to convey all that I want to. So it's not a matter of like which kind of speaks to me more, it's which speaks more to what I want to say better. Um, and it
I
really
like that.
varies from
That's
whatever
really
I'm
cool.
obsessing with.
It's like
Yeah,
it's like which one's the best vehicle for my current thought processes and emotions and
exactly.
whatnot.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. Um, I was also kind of thinking while I was reading the book, I was thinking, you know, if you had any sort of thought on whether poetry or fiction has had a larger impact historically on the world and people's lives, or if perhaps somehow it's actually the intersection of the two, like Beowulf or the Odyssey or something like that. Um, like, and if you have an opinion on that, where do you see your own work beginning to kind of fit into that literary tradition, if at all?
Um, it would definitely be the latter. I don't see my work fitting into those kind of traditions for sure. I don't ever think I want to fit into that because that's not where I want to write in. That kind of epic scale that speaks to, you know, humanity on such like a large level. I think my writing is a bit more for like the everyday person who's just trying to figure things out, I think. But question about like which kind of genre lens is more prevalent. I don't know. It really varies, I think. I like having a blend of the two, kind of like what I was speaking to earlier of like what is it that the author wants to say. It depends on, which genre, which vehicle is better suited to it.
What So, I guess, what is your identity as a writer? Do you think of yourself as a poet? Do you think of yourself as an author, just a generic writer?
I would think I consider myself a poet first. And even after having written the novel, um, at times I felt like I was writing poetry in it, just because uh, the structure of a novel is so much different than writing a poetry collection. And at times I found myself becoming tired or hit a wall and didn't know where to go with the next paragraph. I just kind of reframed my thinking around my drafting and considered, well, I don't really know where Delia's going next with this, but let's just play around with her in a poem and see how the next few paragraphs unfold as a poem. And that's where I kind of got to insert a lot of figurative language and imagery, which felt a lot easier than telling myself that I was writing a novel, for sure.
Interesting. Cool.
So yeah, poet first, I think. Yeah.
Okay. And I suppose even more than that, I know that at the very least, your work is marketed as being that of an LGBTQ writer. And so
Right.
I'm a little curious, is that primarily marketing, or is that like a description that feels meaningful and accurate to you personally?
Um, I think the wording around marketing as an LGBT writer is a bit stiff and does not leave a lot of room for any other identities. I think that's just necessary because there's such a lack. There is a lack of underrepresented writers, especially in Canadian literature, that it's necessary to categorize my books as that. But I don't approach a project thinking of, writing this as a gay writer or writing a gay story. I don't do that. I just write kind of the story that needs to be told. And I think just inherently because of who I am, the themes of queerness and minority representation just kind of naturally kind of unfold within the prose or the poem. Um, I think it's important that I do recognize the importance of identify as acknowledging that I do identify as an LGBTQ writer for you know, emerging LGBTQ writers to see that there are people like us writing about whatever it is that we are writing about, to show that there is room for us, in the landscape of literature in Canada and the world. I think, yeah. But yeah, I don't know that the whole marketing people as LGBT writers and what have you. I don't really like to fall into that. But again, it's so that just feels so confined in expressing what I write about. Yeah.
I've asked a female writer about being categorized as like a feminist writer. I've asked an African American writer
Right.
about being categorized that way, and I get similar responses from everybody. And it's just such a trend. Like, I'm a writer, man, but I understand that we have to like
Well, I wouldn't say it's a trend either as well. It's not, I think it comes from a very authentic perception of how we perceive ourselves and how others perceive us. So I wouldn't say it's a trend necessarily. It's just being
Mm,
pigeonholed as that writer does a disservice to anything else that I am capable of, I think.
right.
Yeah.
I totally didn't mean to put words in
Yeah. No,
anybody's mouth
yeah,
that
it's
how
fine.
you're feeling is a trend. I meant like the responses that I'm hearing. There was
Right.
a trend in the same response to my
Yeah.
ears. It's very fascinating to me because I think that the question of identity is so key, especially when we start talking about fantasy books, because
Right.
usually in fantasy books, the question is, who am I? There's always a journey to figure out who you are in the grand scheme of the world. But your
Hmm.
story very bluntly in the beginning asks the question, what am I? Well, technically it doesn't even ask what am I. Delia asks, what are you? And
Yeah. Right.
I found it doubly fascinating because it's not as typical in literature, but it's also not a question I've ever had to ask myself. But I know that other people have probably had to ask themselves that question. So I want to know, do you have experience asking yourself that particular question?
I think people who feel like they don't ask themselves that have the privilege not to ask themselves what they are because they are not seen as something as other. I've had to ask myself that a lot. I still do. Who am I and when am I? The who am I as in who I identify as and how I perceive myself, and then what am I is the perception of who I am, of what I am. In terms of Reese's predicament, it was important for me to ask those two questions in the story of who is he and what is he, because those two perceptions come into conflict, and that's where he kind of struggles with finding where he stands. How much of is he in terms of who is he, and how much of his identity is made up of what others see him as, which was very fun to play with, in the writing of him.
I mean, we'll just be open and honest and cards on the table. I definitely have that privilege of not having to had to, I the who am I is something I
Right.
struggle with moment to moment. So we'll just open, honest question time, right? Are there two different questions? Um, Curious, is it like a chicken and egg concept, or are they
Oh,
very much
interesting.
interlinked?
Hmm. Um. Hmm. I think in terms of for Reese at least, it's definitely. interlinked, I think. Oh, it's very difficult actually now thinking about what comes first, his perception of himself or who or what he is. But I think one definitely leads into the other. I think, in terms of the story, Not All Dragons, the question of what am I with Reese is the stories surrounding him, what he is, that of what they say him of what they say him to be. And that's kind of the story that he has, the problem that he has to navigate, because I think deep down he does know who he is. He refused it for a long time. Um, and there was a lot of trying to conform to the question of what he was. And that did not turn out very well for him, uh, unfortunately. And, but that's how, he learns, how we all learn. But yeah, I don't know if it's either, it really depends on, like, I think at what point someone is looking at, if, what came first, the chicken or the egg, in terms of what am I or who am I. At Reese, we meet him in the middle of his life. Um, he has lived a whole story before where the story of Not All Dragons begins, which answers to who am I. But yeah, this book really dives into the what, I think, of who he is, because he has to kind of rebuild himself, from lack of understanding and knowing who he is. And that becomes a bit of a precarious situation, whether it's him trying to, like in the terms of him trying to balance knowing who he is, but also refuting as much of what other people tell him he is. Yeah.
That concept of what other people tell him, we're definitely going to come back to that in a hot minute, for sure, for sure. I wrote copious notes on that kind of a concept. If I might ask personally, was there any moment, or perhaps a different way to phrase it is did you have a first realization that what am I was a different question than who I am I, and you needed those answers?
Yeah, for Reese, I couldn't write the story, really draft it out until I answered what he was. I knew who he was. I knew the things he felt and um why he is in the position he is. Like, I knew how he got there. I just I knew it had to do with something of what he was. And for the longest time I did not know what he was. And it was really frustrating because I wanted to write his story, but it was hard to take him in any direction without knowing what he was. But, once I finally figured it out and told myself, like, okay, that's what he is, kind of thing, without, giving any spoilers of what he is, um, that's really when the drafting really started to happen and I could start writing his story. Yeah. So it was very important for me to know what he was, to understand what he was pushing up against. Because, I did understand that he did have a resistance against something. I just needed to know what that was. Yeah.
I know in the real world, uh, obviously there's all of these expectations and everything out there.
Right.
Um, and I found it very interesting that like many readers, we love books specifically because of the familiarity of archetypes and tropes and whatnot. But I think people sometimes forget that those aren't simply literary creations, that they're actually like things that exist
Yeah.
in the real world via psychology and whatnot.
Right.
And while
Right.
those familiar book constructs are actually the things that often create a lot of discomfort for all of us out in the real world. So in the book, right, Reese is a completely blank slate at the beginning. He has absolutely nothing to compare himself to. But in real life,
Yeah.
people have
Yeah.
everything to compare themselves to. So in that line of thinking, did you have to answer the question of what is Reese in order to be able to create all of the backstory of the world? Or was sort of Lanilia kind of created in your mind and you had to figure out how Reese fit into that?
It was a little bit of both. I felt like the question that had to be answered first was what he was. And then that's kind of, once I figured out what he was, I knew kind of the group that he belonged to and how they fit into the world. And then once they were kind of settled, that's when Lanilia started unfolding for me. in terms of
Okay.
other identities and their beliefs in um, their relationship to magic. For one, was really fun to write out. Kind of these two kind of different schools of thought, especially within the Mernese. You have the one camp who is all for growing legs and going on land, and then you have the other camp who refuses to leave the sea. Um, that was fun to play with, to see how different groups could kind of push up against each other and be in kind of like create kind of tension within themselves. Because I think that was fun for me to write, because I think a lot of times people um, are under the perception that they're, you know, magical groups are not utopian, but they're more or less kind of like happy in their ways, kind of thing. And I wanted to write,
Homogeneous, yeah.
um, yes, homogenous, and I wanted to write with some of the groups in Linelia to not be so homogenous in their thoughts, which what really played it well into my obsession with myths and how myths are misunderstood, how they change, and how they're um, interpreted differently by others. Yeah.
Has anybody ever told you that that rift amongst the Mernese reminded them a little bit in flavor of the Little Mermaid in the Hans Christian
No.
because Ariel really wants to go on land, but like all of the other
Well,
ones are like, "How could
yeah.
you?" So there's kind of like that little rift there, and I kind of had that thought in my mind. I was like, "Oh, that's a cute little like I like that little callback to other fantasies and other myths. Kind of makes it
Yeah,
kind of
I
feel
think,
like it's connected."
yeah, I never thought about that. No one's ever mentioned that to me, but I guess there is that connection. But I think within Ariel's case, it wasn't so much that she shouldn't have gone land. It was like her people telling her that humans are things to be feared, right? That she shouldn't be associated with them. But yeah, I guess there is a similarity there.
Do you
And
think on
I think
any way?
with I think
Go ahead.
with mythical creatures that are kind of hybrids, there's that um, constant feeling of being torn between two worlds. You don't fully belong in one or the other, and that's a constant kind of question that kind of propels them to make their choices and how they make their choices. Sure. I didn't think about Ariel at all when I was writing the mer people in my book. I wanted to write mermaids that I have never seen before. I wanted to give them different tails. I wanted to make them kind of frightening a little bit. It was fun kind of describing how Delia looked and the way that her tail transforms when she's in the water. Anywhere that I can kind of give a glimpse of kind of grotesquerie to like something that is otherwise beautiful is always fun for me. So like when Delia, dips her toes back in the waters, there's that line that I really am proud of where the satisfactory cracking of her bones kind of like regrows her tail, which I think would be, in my mind, realistic because that's kind of what would happen. I think if you're changing your form. But yeah,
I'm actually glad to hear you say some of that because I was reading and I was just like, maybe I just haven't read enough mermaid characters because I these feel so unique. Like I've never read them like this. And then I was trying to think, is she supposed to be beautiful or is she supposed to
mm,
be scared? Like, because at some
right,
time she's really pretty. You to kind
yeah,
of describe her hair
yes,
and other times you're like,
yes,
ooh. It's like, okay, I'm glad I was
she's
having this like push and pull inside. I'm glad to
yeah.
hear you say some of that. It kind of justifies some
I
of my
wanted that. Yeah,
interest.
yeah, I wanted that to be portrayed how she would be portrayed. She is quite beautiful in this very ethereal way, but at the end of it all, she is a creature, an animal. She is wild. Um, just as same with the witches in the book, they are kind of like this hauntingly beautiful presence
Yeah.
that definitely have a creepy factor to them. Um, it's just that kind of dichotomy that I like to play in, that tightrope between beautiful and monstrous.
I'll tell you what, Sarah J. Moss can eat her heart out with witches because yours were cool. Those were
Oh, thank
awesome.
you. Yeah, the witches. Thank you. People have told me they like the witches, and I like the witches too. And they were never. I never intended them to become what they are in the book. But I'm glad how they turned out and their relationship to Reese as he finds out how he is interpreted by them, which was very fun to write. The whole idea of the witches, there's a lot of transformation in the book, as you probably picked up on
Hmm.
the mermaids transforming, and the witches also transform into, they have their bipedal forms, which are more or less humanoid. And of course, they can transform into creatures. And that kind of idea kind of was inspired by witches having familiars. I've always liked that idea of having this animal companion. But again, I know of that idea. I just wanted to do it in a different way where what if they just became their own familiars instead of, having to walk around with an owl on their shoulder, they just became it.
I
That
totally
was fun
never
to do.
I never put two and two together there. That's awesome.
Yeah, and
Um,
it was a really kind of cheeky way of me to like um, give some of the witches non-real animal forms, especially I think the crestback witches. They're furious, ferocious warrior witches, and they transform into these frightening reptilians that are like, they stand on four legs with a sail on their back, and that was inspired by my kind of obsession with prehistoric life. And there's that one creature that predates dinosaurs called a dimetrodon, who's more closely related to mammals than it is to reptiles. But that's kind of where those witches kind of came from, and it was fun to kind of give the witches forms that I didn't, I have not come across yet.
Thinking about all of these, can we just call them creatures in
Yeah,
Lanilia?
they are
Yeah, just
creatures.
creatures.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
that they like as you were kind of saying, none of them, they're all kind of like hybrids of all of these different concepts that we have
yeah,
in our world. So you can't just say,
yeah,
oh, it's a wolf that transforms into a human, or oh, it's a fish that transforms into a human, right? It's like these hybrids that
yeah.
you can't put a name to. Um, and
Yes,
I
yes,
was thinking of that concept because Reese is trying to find identity and belonging and
yeah.
acceptance and whatnot. And I was scrolling Instagram the other day and I came across a reel. It was like a Pride Month kind of thing from a white woman talking about how people are people and love is love, and we don't have to understand it in order to accept it. And she related it to, I don't know or understand anything about astrophysics, but I accept the fact that rockets go up to space. And I paused on that for a lot of way too much time. And I thought to myself, okay, I understand the layered sentiment being expressed in these economy of words, right?
Right, right.
But then I was thinking about Reese and all of the creatures around him, and it struck me in that moment that saying things like that might actually be slightly hurtful for some individuals to
Mm-hmm,
hear. And I wanted
mm-hmm.
to
Yeah.
ask, is there a difference between acceptance and understanding? And is like true acceptance
Yeah.
rooted in understanding, and how can someone who has never lived or experienced something then therefore truly understand it? Wow, that was a very layered question. I'm sorry if you
Right.
need me to break that down.
I think it's not so much the emphasis on understanding to accept. I think it's the key is empathy. Um, can you empathize? Can you really, even though your experiences are different, can you find something that in your life that has kind of resonated in the same more or less way as somebody else to understand them? Um, yeah, I think they're inextricably linked, right? You can't. I don't think this is just my personal opinion. I don't think you can fully accept something until you understand why it is the way it is, or um, which going back to that astrophysics example is a bit crude. I think
Thought so
I
too.
don't
My
think that
wife would
works
too.
fully. Yeah, so it's just you have it's boils back down to empathy for me. Can you empathize? It's one thing to say you support, but you know can you really understand the meaning of that support and what authentic support and acceptance is without having experienced exactly what another group or person has gone through. Yeah. I think with Reese's problem, it's a bit trickier because while he does discover there's no one really like him, sort of, um, there are kind of signs that there were or are. So there's that kind of hope that he holds on to, that there have been individuals like me in the past or concurrently. And that's kind of where the belonging kind of comes into, where he sees himself reflected a little bit in the literature that he comes across, and finds that that's tiny sliver of belonging, however ominous it may be to him, and to others. It's still a sense of belonging, right? Even though it may, you know, it may spell kind of doom and and a bad omens. Those, though, being connected to those is still a sense of belonging. You still fit into the culture. He does still fit into the culture. It's just a bit trickier in finding comfort in that, and how he interprets that.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
not only because of the good word ominous nature of the readings that he comes across,
Yes.
but also the way in
Yes.
which his peers hold that
Yeah.
same ominous history in such disdain.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. They definitely have a standpoint on what he is. And I think there are times in the books where there are little small outbursts of frustration from him, where they're rightly earned, because the disdain towards him is so boxing. It's so pigeonholed. And he's like, I'm not this, but everyone keeps telling me that I am. And yeah, it's just, again, reflective of real life stuff, even though it's a fantasy. The power of allegory.
I have some things I'd like to ask you about, and it's almost sort of like we're going to
Hmm,
flip the script a little bit. We've been talking about Reese and from his
no worries.
perspective stuff, and I would love to kind of flip the script a little bit and talk about the story from the perspective of those that are holding Reese in such disdain. Um,
Okay, yeah, right.
because I don't know, you probably don't know this. I actually read your book one and a half times. Uh,
Interesting.
because I I was reading it and I got about 35-40% of the way through the story, uh, where Reese finds the answer to the very first question and then goes to a whole new level of othering because of all the things we've been talking about. And then I had a weekend evening with some guys. We met for some drinks at somebody's house. We were playing music and just catching up and reminiscing on old times. And the whiskey flowed, and then comments started coming out in an unsolicited manner, right?
As
And
they
and I
do.
don't want to. I'm not going to try to call anybody out here, but like blah 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 blah. One of the dudes started talking about how being trans is a trend, and blah blah blah, going off on a tangent about that kind of crap. And
Hmm.
I was shocked into an inability to respond. And by the time my quasi inebriated thoughts caught up to my indignation, it was way too late, and the conversation had moved on. And I decided right then and there it was time to go home. So I went home
Good
and I was very
choice.
upset for days. And I tried to leave it alone and I couldn't. So I tried to find an escape in your book. And I read a couple more chapters and I got about halfway through. And the only thing I could read was this allegory, right? My lens in your book had been completely and utterly changed. So I put the book down and told myself I was going to restart it the next day from scratch because needed to. And the
Couldn't
more
shake
I
it.
thought about my basement conversation, I guess is what I've started calling it to for with my wife, and more so my lack of response, I came to realize that other than extreme indignation, I'm not exactly sure what I could have said.
I think that is the yeah, that's probably an okay place to arrive at, I think,
And
especially in that setting. Yeah.
So I feel like I need to know more. I need to understand more, and I feel like this isn't maybe an okay space to try to do that a little bit. If we use
Mm.
some examples from the book, and we'll keep details and spoilers out of everything. Um, so if you're amenable to that,
Yeah, sure.
we already kind of talked about how the creatures that inhabit Lanilia are these kind of very rarely obvious creatures or tropes from our world. They're kind of mashed together hybrids, and yet they just are, right? And they sort
Yeah,
of more or less accept one another on a general level. Um,
yeah,
Still, when an individual doesn't fit into that socially accepted version like Reese, they're shunned. So in that regard, Reese very specifically thinks to himself, let me open the quote real quick. He had difficulty wrapping his mind around why his survival was being perceived with fear, why being alive felt like something he needed to know how to defend.
mm, yeah. That's sad, isn't
And
it?
that's not something, it's very sad. And
Yeah. I just think I wrote that for him because there's no other way for him to think about it. He's been through such a horrible experience that's led him to where he was. Why wouldn't someone be grateful for his survival? I mean, there are people, but there are some people who are so against it, are so creatures are so against it. Sure, but yeah, it's that kind of that awkward position that he's in, where he cannot put into words why he is the way he is. And just because that's so, people project an identity onto him, um, which is unfortunate. But yeah, yeah,
have you ever felt the need to defend your existence like Reese?
yes, many times over. I shouldn't frame it like this. But it's the only way to do it. The one example that comes to mind is very. It may seem trivial, but it is not. Is that so? I'm Asian, of Vietnamese and Chinese descent. All throughout school, I'm horrible at math. I could never do it. I always failed math class, and people made fun of me because I was Asian, and apparently I'm supposed to be good at numbers and all that
Stereotypes,
crap.
yeah.
Exactly, and I felt very powerless in even trying to come up with a response to that because it's just not who I am. This is not who I was and am. Like I just because I look a certain way does not really mean I should be capable of certain things or incapable of certain things. But yeah, it's tough trying to defend something where you feel like it shouldn't need to be because it's so linked to like who you are as a person, and it doesn't really ever feel good having to defend your existence, I think. Yeah, just to put it mildly. Yeah,
I
it's
know that
tough.
at least in the book, Reese is pretty resilient to this stuff. And I think maybe that has something to do with his
Mm,
amnesia. It's hard to put what's
yeah,
happening
I
in
think,
context, but like what
yeah,
I can only imagine that that does something to one's sense of self and the way in which you move through the world. And like,
sense.
what is
Yeah.
that like?
I think at first it breaks you down. It grinds you down till you feel like enough is enough and you can't really take it anymore, which is like the hardest part to be in, I think. But then eventually, once you kind of pull out of that kind of like darkness, the resilience comes through. Reese just gets there, uh, you know, quite quickly, which I commend him for. Um, there's a stubbornness in him that I really admire. That he refuses to be thought of as something that he isn't, which I love about him. But yeah, I think the resilience comes from knowing what rock bottom feels like. I think where you feel like you can't sink any lower, so you're just gonna go up. I think, yeah.
I know the world is a crap place. So, like, just
Yeah, it's
because you
very
become
horrible.
resilient, it, mm, is that something that you can ever become more comfortable with? Or is that
It's
still
hard
something
because, like,
that's, yeah,
yeah, resilience and, you know, what comes to mind is being resilient, but also it's hard to feel proud of being resilient because it's something that you were forced to do. Resilience comes from being cornered, being feeling like you have no escape. Um, and it's not something that is very prideful to think about. I think, at least in my perception of my experiences of everything, um, it's difficult to keep going and reminding yourself that, okay, you've kind of got over this hill before. This one's similar. Just do it again, kind of thing. The resilience keeps building up, but also it's taxing. And like, how much resilience can you build until you feel so weighed down by being resilient? I think, yeah, it's like a never ending. Was it Sisyphus and the boulder kind of thing?
yeah, that's, I was just thinking of that because I was thinking, like on some level, it would be nice to not need to be resilient,
Wouldn't it?
but the
Wouldn't it
world is
be?
so
Yeah,
crap that if you ever get to the point where you're not resilient for a hot minute, it's like a muscle that
it'll
would
crush you.
atrophy, and would the world just
Yes.
be even worse the next time around?
Yeah. Yes. And I've been there many times before where it does not feel good to to feel your muscles atrophy, literally. Um, but yeah, it's this is why I wanted to write Reese's story into a fantasy, because that is the world where I feel like I can breathe and tell things that are true to my experience with in a pretty little picture with a pretty little mermaid. And feel and I don't know, writing Reese's story and seeing how resilient he is and him coming to terms with everything and the choices that he's made. Um, I don't know. I felt like he kind of nodded to me at the end of that book and was like, "We're good now, or we will be, and we'll keep on being good." I think. Yeah, it's
That's a
strange
beautiful
how.
cap on this. Yeah.
Yeah. It's
Um,
strange how being ground down so many times, and feeling like things are okay, because you're always feeling like something is gonna, atrophy at any moment. Something will go wrong at any moment still.
we've been talking about, that quote that I pulled came from Reese being
Mm.
with his own people, but even before
Yeah.
he gets to that point, he feels attacked by other entities, and what I thought was one of the most interesting, and I don't know if you do this purposefully, but it's one of the most interesting allegorical literary creations I think I've ever read, The Unravelers.
Wow.
Uh,
But weren't they fun? Yeah,
fun.
they're interesting.
They are this, like, for people listening, they are this like nondescript coalition of individuals, and ever since they arrived in Lanilia, they're not, by my understanding, native to Lanilia. The native
No, they're not.
inhabitants have been being captured and killed, and the land itself has become less vibrant,
Yes.
less of what it was, like
Yes.
unraveled. You don't want to,
Yep.
define the thing with
Yeah.
the word, but so the
No,
big
but this
question
is a
is
case where I
here,
wanted to be. Yeah.
why, like, why are they doing what they're doing? Like, specifically, Reese, here's another quote, ponders the question to himself, and he comes up with a quasi answer that I found to be very telling and very insightful and very interesting. He says, quote, power, maybe, or fear. Perhaps it is easier for them to take and dismantle what they are afraid of rather than understand it like how we understand ourselves.
Yeah. I
If
think
that's
Delia
not,
says that, right? Yeah.
I thought
I
that
think
was
Delia
Reese's
says that
inner
too.
monologue, but perhaps that was a
Oh, it could have been
Delia
that
thing
too.
too.
It could have been
But
that
if
too.
that's not
Yeah.
poetry in prose form, I don't know what is. That is
Thank you.
quite the statement.
Thank you. And that's how
Um,
I got through paragraphs, by writing little poems like that. The
and
Unravelers were very, um, in earlier drafts, they were just called hunters because that's what they did. they hunted the magical creatures, and but I have always understood them to be this, like you said, nondescript group who literally unravel, tear apart Linnilian creatures to. I wanted to leave their purpose and their motives very ambiguous, but really, I think they're trying to harness the magic and understand it somehow. To what means, I'm not really sure yet. And it just it's very, yeah, very allegorical in that violent route of understanding. The Unravelers, I really wanted to make them at the intersection of magic and science. So a lot of their um, what Reese stumbles upon in their camp is kind of scientific, at least what I tried to make scientific with, like, clearly they're experimenting on creatures with, beakers and whatnot, collecting Myrnie's blood and drinking it. Um, but then of course, there's that ritual they do with the fire. They are trying to understand the world of Lanilia. They are just doing it in such a horrible, horrible way that it is unforgivable. And Delia and others are right to be so disheartened and crushed by it. But yeah, they were such a neat group to kind of put together to kind of, Reese is up against his own demons and villains, but they were the villains that had to kind of be that overarching threat that he had to navigate through as well. And I'm really happy with how they turned out. However far that term takes in feeling about the Unravelers. Um, but yeah, yeah, they
I
are
like how you were
they do
saying that
definitely
they're kind
yeah.
of like an intersection of magic and science because I kept thinking it was like a weird, twisted version of alchemy the entire time.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
that is very much what they're doing. They're alchemists who are trying to bend Lanilian magic in ways that it is not supposed to be bent. Um, that's kind of my feeling of what they're doing.
Yeah.
And yeah, yeah,
And
definitely.
I read them very much as a stand in for like, and these are my opinions, not the author's. PSA, uh, colonialization, um, Christian
But yeah, that line
nationalism,
is yeah, yeah.
bigotry
That
at
line could
its
be very
largest.
clearly drawn to them.
Um,
Yeah.
but if we might, since it's a little allegorical, if we might bring them to our side of reality for a second, do you think I want you to answer that kind of question. Power maybe or fear. Do you think that
Mm,
all of this misunderstood hate is out of fear, or do you think it's a power play to gain power over what they don't understand?
hmm. My gut is to like go with fear. I think fear in that they recognize um, the perceived threat of this wild, untamed, magical land. So they try to suppress it, bend it to their own will, to control their fear. But what's so ironic is fear is so uncontrollable. You will feel it whether or not you want to, and you will have to go through it. Um, Hopefully, in not such a violent way as the Unravelers do. Uh, yeah, I think it's out of fear. It's out of fear, but also it's out of this twisted curiosity. Um, I'm I'm kind of like imagining the Unravelers to be these scientific explorers almost, and they are just have this kind of dark edge to them where they can only understand things by tearing it apart, I think, and that's just kind of how they are.
Are you suggesting they're like reverse engineering reality?
Kinda, maybe they are. Yeah, I've been giving a lot of thought in kind of their impetus for what they're doing, and it's helping me kind of loosely map out a follow up to Not All Dragons, um, and kind of their curiosity. I think there's a lot more there to explore other than just the horrible crap that they're doing um, to Lanilians. which makes me excited to plant kind of like an unraveler who may be against that kind of outlook or approach to understanding magic.
like a
But it's just
deconstructionist.
things, kinda, yeah. It's just different modes of understanding um, and making sense of the world, which is a very big theme that I like to work with in this book for sure.
So you said the unravelers are motivated by fear primarily. Do you think that holds true for
Yeah,
their allegorical counterparts in our world? Or
I think so. That's why things are phobias, right?
that's a smart
Fear of the
answer.
other. That's fear of the others. It's just that's one of the things it boils down to, and then power is a subsequent, I think, result of 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 one group realizing they fear something so badly that they need to like extinguish it, and in turn, that's how they gain power. And it's a cycle that's played itself through history many times over, and continues to, unfortunately.
I know
Yeah.
with history, it's pretty clear that evil people exist or have existed, but I know,
Yes, evil because evil exists, right? It's
yeah,
yeah,
but I know one of the
yeah.
things I've had to tell myself over and over again, like to simply survive a corporate job, is that people don't
Mm,
wake up in the morning and think to themselves, "How can I be a crappy person today?"
right.
Um,
Yeah.
it's sort of like a mantra for, myself, at least to remember that people are good or at the very least have good intentions. Do you think
Yes.
that's true? Or is it just a mantra that we tell
Uh,
ourselves to cope?
that's a big question to answer, to try and answer. I'd like to think that people don't have evil intentions, but I think that's untrue. I think, yeah, yeah. There's that saying. Oh my god, I don't know where it's from. Oh my god, either a movie or somebody said it, where it's evil is like a perception. It really depends on which side you're looking at it up from and who is looking at it, and that's kind of what dictates is evil or not. Um, it's like that saying, "The hell to road is paved with good intentions," right? That's how one of the great thing, one of not the great, one of the ways that evil um, kind of comes into being. I think, yeah. For the Unravelers, definitely, that's the route they're taking. They're taking the road to hell, paved with mighty good intentions. I think, yeah,
I know the unravelers are a pretty like hyperbolic example of evil, and it's not
yeah,
necessarily just the everyday people we come into contact with that say and do
right.
these little minded things. Um,
Hmm. Yeah,
but if we think that these people that we come into contact every day that they unknowingly hurt our feelings, right? They have good intentions. They're not trying to be mean. They're like, what can I phrase it as? Accidentally hurtful or accidentally bigoted without even
yeah.
really realizing it. And maybe we're all that way to some extent, right? Um, so I guess what I'm kind of leading up to is a question of like, do you do you personally have any sort of day-to-day experience of genuine hostility versus accidental misunderstanding?
I don't. Hmm, that's a really difficult question for me to answer. I don't think I don't, I feel like it's less so now. I think I surround myself with less ignorant people who have shown me that they take the time to understand their place in the world and my place in the world. And so that has kind of cushioned it a little bit. But yeah, you do come across people who just offhandedly say shit and it will rub me the wrong way. And honestly, yeah, it's just like kind of telling myself not to kind of latch onto those kind of feelings a little as much as I used to. Yeah, I used to get very angry. I think at people. for
So
things that they would say and do offhandedly, but not so much anymore.
so what you're saying is like nowadays you're able to spot the accidents and kind of respond
Yeah,
appropriately.
I think so. Yeah, I can spot them definitely, you know, ahead more and kind of, do what I need to do to navigate them if I come across those kind of situations for sure. Yeah, yeah.
For some of those accidental words and behaviors, are there any like common examples that you've encountered that like if people only knew they could start correcting?
Hmm. I think what in terms of like my my writing, it's not an example of like it hurting me, but it just definitely affected me. Is that when my poetry book came out, Mythical Man, I was being marketed, what have you, if you want to say that word, as like the gay Asian poet, um, and I didn't that didn't sit well with me. I didn't like that a lot because it was just very it was just coloring me over with a very single colored brush, I think. And because I knew that for myself, I know that I'm I am capable of doing a lot more than writing about being sad and gay. And I pushed back, and how I pushed back against that was releasing the Dream of Me as Water book, where that kind of had the mandate of I'm not tied to any identity forever kind of thing. That I'm always changing. We're always changing as people, just as water changes the shape of the container that it's in, kind of thing.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, it's just kind of like not. Yeah, I can anticipate and spot kind of those feelings of hostility a bit sooner, and can react in ways that are beneficial to me and not hurtful to kind of anybody else and me, of course. Expressing it through the second poetry book was a lot easier for me than writing like an op-ed or something about my identity as a Canadian writer and being Asian and gay.
Yeah, the reason I actually wanted to ask some of those questions at the beginning of this interview was one, I don't want to,
Hmm.
phrase anything in a shitty way while we're talking, but two, some of the marketing information you get as a podcaster or an ARC or a beta reader has some of that
Right.
language in there. But if I go to your website,
Of course. Yeah.
there's like none of that language on your website outside of
Right.
the book of poems that is very obviously using the word queer.
Right. Oh yeah.
So I
I
was
guess
like,
not. Yeah.
oh, it's
Hmm.
not on his website. This has to mean something. I am
Yeah.
going to attack this differently.
That is such a
So,
astute observation that I didn't really realize. Of course, I would never market myself as that. But again, I understand because of the industry I'm in. I understand why it's needed. It is important.
yeah.
It is, we are humans. We need to categorize things. That's how we understand things, right? It's just that when you're trying to understand a person's
Hmm.
identity, it's not so easily categorizable.
You are not your
Yeah.
books.
Yes, I am not
Yeah.
my books. I am not
You're not your
my
books.
stories. I'm not my poems. They are just not even facets, like whatever the word is that dictates something smaller than a facet of who I am. Uh, my books are what I enjoy, to what I enjoy imagining, what I enjoy creating, be it
Hmm.
horrific or beautiful, be it a poem or a story that is has some heavy themes in it, but the it's not heavy for me to talk about because I feel like it's not me. Yeah.
I think that is beautiful, and I think it's a perfect time to begin segueing away from hate and kind of into some of the love aspects in the book. Maybe a
Mm.
good segue in that way is the young character. I didn't actually write down his name, so I might struggle with this. I think his name is Vin, the very young.
Oh, yes.
Cool.
I had a feeling you were
And
talking about him. Yes,
well, yes,
Vin.
and there's an even bigger one. But Vin
Yeah.
stands up. He stands up for Reese
Oh,
at
was
one
yeah,
point
wasn't that
or
sweet?
another, and
Yeah.
I found that to be very, very sweet is a good word, especially because Vin is so young. It almost comes from the innocence of a child type of a concept.
Yes.
I was
Yes.
wondering, I was wondering if Vin was based in any way, shape, or form on real life.
In my real life? No. He I thought it would have been so neat and so refreshing and sweet to see a little child stand up to these like really strong individuals and just tell it as it is based on his experience with Reese. And yeah, he stands up for Reese where nobody else would. Yeah, no one else said anything in that moment except Vin. And um, I wanted that moment to happen, but how it unfolded was a bit surprising in that setting, in that very tense scene where things were falling apart for Reese. I think. Um, yeah, that was such a special, I think, moment to include for me personally. It was really nice to have that quiet voice be the loud one for once and be so impactful to Reese. And I love that. And I loved that. That is really I think we see Vin one more time in the end of the book when he's out and about. Um, and you know I think the sparse scenes that he shared with Reese really kind of formed a really strong relationship between the two, even though he was as a passing through kind of character. Um, and but also when Vin is brought back home, um, Vin's dad, who was injured, he did not show any animosity towards Reese, which I thought was really important to include as well, and to show that Vin's stance later doesn't really come from nowhere. He his father is not ignorant,
Hmm.
as what we see, and I think it made sense to have him do that because his dad was just grateful that Reese brought his son back, you know, regardless of what other people thought Reese was. Um, yeah, it was a nice thing to put for me personally, I think, and I'm glad it resonated, I think, with you.
Yeah, it's a very small moment in the book, but I think it's a very powerful moment in the book, and it's a reminder that
Yeah.
we should all be like Vin, and instead of being right, we should stand up for what is right. And I thought that was a very powerful
Yeah.
moment.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really, really good way to put it. Like, don't stand up for what is right. Just yeah. Don't fall into the trap of like arguing for what is right. Just
Yeah, it's I think too often, especially in modern day society, people, countries, entire groups are so fixated on being right, even if
yes.
they're not just. I won.
Yeah.
That's they're
Yeah.
so fixated on being right that they often lose sight of what is right.
Yeah.
And I thought, and
Completely correct.
Vin was a
Yeah.
very wonderful reminder of that. And
Yeah.
that not gonna I don't want to
Yeah.
harp on it, but it really hit me because of the basement moment that I had experienced
Mm,
very recently while reading.
yeah.
Um,
It was also nice to kind of show that tender side of Vin too, because when Reese first comes across him, he's quite ferocious.
he's kind of a
Um,
badass, yeah.
he's kind of a badass. He's a little kid, but he really stands on his own, really, really well. But then he has such like a tender heart to him, and I like that in a kid who's like tough, but also sweet and
Mhm.
sensitive. Yeah.
And other than Vin, I mean, there's countless characters that are allies within the book, right? I mean, we talked
Right.
about Delia and
Yeah.
everything, but
Mhm.
specifically, I think, and you might have to help me with the pronunciation here, but Sarek,
Yep.
one
That's
of
how I
Reese's
imagined his name
former
being said. Yeah.
teachers actually told him a very lovely tidbit, something along the lines of, um, "Those who hold you for how you are the ones that matter."
Yes. Yeah.
And I thought that was another beautifully written poetic line in prose disguise.
Thank you.
And it kind of harkens back to, I guess, my question sort of about the difference between acceptance and understanding. But I guess maybe
Hmm.
the question is, what exactly does meaningful support actually look like to someone that is looking for it?
It's that kind of non-judgmental and reciprocal kind of understanding of each other, and where we come from. Sarek is very right in saying, only the ones that understand you are the ones. Or he says that right? Did I write that right? Did I say that right? So, only the ones who hold you that matter.
Hold you
Um,
hold you for how you
hold you
are.
for who you are. Yeah, for how you
Yeah.
are. Yes, because phrasing it like that, I think is important to understand how someone is the way they are, is to truly understand them. You know, in furthering it a bit, understanding how someone is acknowledging their previous experiences and their previous sadness and and happiness, and those are the things that kind of make someone who they are, I think, in my eyes. And when you find people who acknowledge those bits of you, that's kind of where they matter the most to you comes from. Those who don't kind of um, take the second, take a second to see those and talk about those things and ask you about them are not really the ones, I think, who are important enough to be held close. I think this is, yeah, my kind of perception of it, my perception of what Sarah meant by that. But yeah, it does ring true, I think, across the real world, that those who understand how you are the ones that matter. Because that really is like, are you really going to consider someone who doesn't understand you, where you come from, higher than someone who does? Like, it doesn't make sense in my mind. And so why you would?
No.
Yeah.
You know, I'm thinking in the moment, like just thinking, the internet in general, I think really
Yeah.
promotes negativity because negativity and conflict are the things that sell and that people stop to watch because it's almost like a street fight, right? And so
Yeah.
there's this whole culture, or I guess advice that has come up that's like, you got to cut people out of your life if they're toxic. But
Hmm.
I don't
Yeah. The
something
whole cancel culture.
something that I'm thinking of with what we're talking about is I don't think I've ever seen any opposite advice of how do you find somebody
Mm.
that is, that kind of supportive? Like, what does that person look like? How do you recognize them? And or is that something like, you know, do you find them? Do they find you? And either which way, how do you recognize that?
I think that's between you and the other person. It's not something that is vocalized, I think, immediately. As opposed to, like, it's so much easier to vocalize hate and canceling someone
Hmm.
who is not on your side. Um, just because this is the silly way the internet is. But I think when you find those people who matter to you and vice versa, you don't feel that need to kind of like get on your soapbox and talk about it because you feel comfortable enough with them. Why should I justify how this person holds me for who I am? You know, I don't
Hmm.
know. That's just kind of maybe my personal take on that. I'm not really one to kind of stand up and shout about kind of, yeah, those things.
Welcome
It
to being
feels
on a
weird.
podcast.
Yeah, yeah, that's what I'm. Yeah, yeah. Interviewing for this book has been very interesting. Yeah, yeah, I don't have this need to shout. I'm a very quiet person, I think. Um, I like to speak through whatever I have to say through my books, and I hope that my books are loud enough where I can't be. Yeah.
uh, I too like to speak through books, hence why I do this. My whole
Yes.
tagline
Yeah.
is that one of the things I love about books is that I think books talk about all of the taboo or uncomfortable or
Yeah.
unpopular topics that we all think about and wrestle with every day, but we're not
Yeah.
actually allowed to verbalize. And so
Yeah.
that has now I
Yeah.
found at least I can force a conversation because we're talking about it via a book, right? And I
Yeah.
found that to be awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. I think because also I'll add to that, like for me at least, and probably for others as well, most likely, that reading has been that haven, that safe place, I think, for us.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that's where that kind of permission, if you allow it, if you want to say that, if you want to phrase it that way, that permission to kind of talk about and think about these things is felt, because it's safe between these pages, I think. Yeah.
We've talked about the, like, very obvious hyperbolically hateful characters and people in the world,
Yeah.
and we've talked about the
Yeah.
exact opposite, the very supportive, wonderful, loving people, in the book and in
Hmm.
the world. But obviously, there's, like, a middle ground that probably most people fall into. Um,
Mm,
like, for example, that
okay.
that guy I was
Interesting.
referencing in the basement, he's not a bad
Right.
person. He's not a malicious individual. He doesn't
Right.
belong to or contribute to any,
Yeah.
organizations that are seeking change or whatever. But clearly, there are some very big lack of understanding going on. And
Yeah.
um, so let's talk about these kinds of people. I think I only have two questions and then we'll wrap
Okay.
up. Um, what what do we do with people who don't understand?
I mean, is it our job to do anything?
That's a
I'm
good
trying to
question.
think because a lot of what you're hoping for them to understand isn't necessarily something that you didactically teach to them. It's their way that they frame the world to themselves has to change. And that's such a tricky thing to do. Like, how do you change people's perception of things? Well, one way you can do it is have them read more, for sure.
Books. Yes.
Read books,
Read books.
and read books and talk to people that who you wouldn't necessarily talk to, but listen more than talk. I think listen. That's what I want to get at. Listen to people more. Those people who voice such vitriol and hatred are so loud in what they vocalize that they don't allow the space for others, I think, to speak up. And that's very daunting and can be very scary as someone speaking for myself who is very introverted and doesn't like to do that kind of big talking stuff. Um, those people who are louder just feel like they need to take a seat back. Just like, what are you so scared of? Like, just chill out and listen and see like how people who are belonging to a group that you do not agree with are living their lives. Is it affecting you in some negative way? I don't think so. Like, as long as they're not hurting anybody, let them live the life that's different from yours because it's not yours. Yeah.
It's an age-old saying, "Live and let live." I don't even know where that originates, it just is.
No, it just is. But yeah, people are weird, I think.
So, I suppose, I guess, obviously, very atypical setting here. Some might even say very, privileged insofar as I read a book and I get to talk to the
Yeah,
creator of that book
that's
about these
right.
things. But
Yeah.
for other people that might want to have a conversation and broaden their understanding, is that conversation welcome? And if so, what is the best way for them to go about starting such a conversation?
Um, I think it's just to start the conversation, just to like start it in a way that doesn't put your opinion first, I think. And and start it in an opening, welcoming way that's like wouldn't be perceived as threatening to the other party. I think. I think a lot of times people are, I guess, they have a tendency to speak first and listen after, right? I think it needs to be switched around a little bit here. Some times, yeah. I think there was another. You made me think about something else Sarek says in the book. What does he say? He does say something to the effect of like, or was it somebody else? But are Surin or Sarek? They say like often those are like who are the loudest or something. Are I'm a horrible author right now. I can't really remember what he said, but it's something to the effect of like those who speak the loudest often like don't have much to say or something like that. Something to that effect.
I think I remember him saying that
Gosh, it's
after
something like that.
after
After
Reese
everything.
encounters a group of his own kind that are
Ah,
going off on him and
okay.
they walk away, and I think Sarek says something along those lines to,
Yeah,
placate
yeah,
the
you're right.
situation.
Yeah, and I think that's so true. It's like, the ones are the loudest in their hates are, often ones the ones who don't get it the most, I think. Yeah. He has some good tidbits in that book. Good for you,
He's
sir.
very wise, and he
Yeah, it
and
was yeah.
I love
Yeah.
each of the, can we call them cities? They each have like keeps. They're like big humongo
Yes, yeah.
libraries, if you will, but
Yes.
um kind of love that.
Yeah, that was super fun to read. I really wanted that to exist in that world, to have that kind of gathering of knowledge in a very like hollowed space that felt very magical and grand, but also very quiet in the things that it kept. Yeah, it was really exciting to kind of have Reese interact with the sanctums, or one of them at least, maybe one and a
I
half.
Probably says more about me than anything, but I kept waiting for a moment in the book where the sanctum was like raided or set on fire or something
Oh well,
was lost.
one of them was damaged. I think at the end when he goes to the other village by the sea, one of the sanctums there was damaged. I was sunk by a storm though. Um, but yeah, oh yeah, that would have been tough to write. I think. I
Mhm.
don't think I ever want to do that. I don't want to destroy libraries.
Amen.
As someone who
Amen.
works in a library, I could not do that. No. Yeah.
I want to be cognizant of your time. So, before
Yeah,
we
for
close
sure.
things out, let's take a moment to look forward. You
Okay.
kind of answered one of these already. With my question was going to be, will we ever see Lanilia again? And the answer to that question is yes. So, what
We
exactly
will.
are your thoughts
Yeah.
on a sequel?
The thoughts that the thoughts are there. I definitely want to pick up. I do want to go back into the world. I do want to write the follow up where Reese is not the main character and that he is a cameo kind of presence. Um, but in a way that shows how he's grown. I do have a clear direction of how he's grown after this book. And very excited to see how that plays out on the page. But I do want to explore more of like the myth of dragons in this story that I've kind of seeded in this book. The witches will be, I think, primarily featured in the next story. Um, Definitely, they're so interesting to me, and I want to see kind of their culture a bit more and their understanding of myth and how it opposes the group that Reese belongs to, and that tension of who gets the right to claim a myth and who, yeah, gets that kind of primary understanding of of a myth. Yeah, it's all very wishy washy right now, of course, but I have images and characters that are coming up
Very
Um,
cool.
yeah, one aspect I really want to explore in the next book is paleontology, which is going to be really fun to work in, and I do know how it's going to play into the witches. I think, yeah, I'm excited for
Interesting.
that.
Very cool. Is that is the sequel or follow-up book the most primary thing on your head or in your mind right now, or are you diving back into poetry first?
No, so the follow up to Knowledge Dragons is kind of backseat, back burner, just simmering. Um, I I just finished editing a poetry book that's coming out this September, so poetry is also kind of not being touched right now really by me, just because I finished doing the next book. So I'm gonna let that do its thing. But what I'm focusing on right now, which I haven't written anything, well, I have written it, I just haven't redrafted it, is another story, just completely out of Lanilia, um, taking place on. It is out of Lanilia, but I'm playing with the same things with water and myth and supernatural themes. So it's a story about a fictional archipelago off the coast of British Columbia, and it takes place across two different time periods. And the main character in the present is haunted by a supernatural entity that's kind of um, claimed itself to his family in in a weird way. So I'm playing with kind of how to tell the story in two different time periods. And the one in the past is in third person, the one in the present is in first person. Just trying to figure out the kinks of different narratives, I think. Yeah, I'm excited for that one. I hope it comes out soon. I just have so much in my head. I haven't had the energy to sit down and write it out yet, but I need to redraft a lot of it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
How best can readers get in touch with you backslash follow your journey?
Mm, don't get in touch with me. No, I'm just kidding. I'm primarily on, I guess, Instagram. That's where I post a lot about my projects. Yeah, David Lee Writes. That's just my website, davidleewrites.ca, David Lee Writes on Instagram. Yeah, that's where I share a lot of my news. I think it's the primary, just because it's so visual for me, and I like working in that. Yeah.
Right on. Well, on that note, I think we have hit a pretty natural conclusion to our conversation. And if I could leave everything off with something one of my favorite musicians has been saying at his concerts for a very, very, very long time now, Mr. Dave Matthews. There are people in this world that would have us believe that it is us versus them. But the reality is that there is no them. There is only us on this planet for the very short time that we're here.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
with that in mind, the book is called Not All Dragons by my wonderful guest, David Lee. Y'all should go out and pick up a copy today. Thank you so much for joining me and being extremely candid in our conversation. It was my great honor.
Thank you. You were a great host.
I appreciate that. So, everybody listening, please like, comment, follow, all that happy, good stuff. And if you'd like to stay in touch or follow along with both either me or David, our contact information will be found in the description down below. Thank you all so much for listening. And until next time, cheers.
Thank you.